Hello there. Today I want to take a look at a hugely popular blend from California. This is the Prisoner. It's the 2019 vintage of this, and it's simply labelled as a California red wine. The brand was started in 2000 by somebody called David Swift Finney as one of the brands in his Orange Swift portfolio. He'd started the company in 1998. He was a relatively new graduate from winemaking college. He had done a bit of travel and in Italy, I believe, had discovered a love of wine, which he brought back to the States with him. He worked at several wineries, having graduated. Whitehall Lane, I believe, is one of those. Robert Mondavi was another. And he gained an interest in producing wines that sort of expressed a California origin, and then produced this particular brand, which has been one of his major brands, as the story goes, quite by chance in 2000. 2000 evidently was a difficult vintage, and he found himself left with some batches of wine he didn't know what to do with. One was a Cabernet Sauvignon that was really quite dilute, and he thought he was going to have to get rid of. Another was a Zinfandel that had stopped fermenting early and still had some sugar in it. And then there were small parcels of Syrah, Petite Syrah, or Durif as the Australians call it, and Charbono, also known to the Argentinians as Bonarda, not the Bonarda you find in Italy, but so anyway, a rather polyglot selection of grape varieties, but all typically grown in and around California. The story goes that he tried blending these, really liked the outcome, but left the blend and had to be away from the winery for a couple of weeks. And when he got back, he found that fortunately the Zinfandel had somehow started re-fermenting again and had got the sugar down to an acceptable level, and that actually the wine worked really well. So he had 345 cases of a wine that he quite liked. Next thing to do was to find a label. Well, evidently the picture of Goya's The Little Prisoner, that is now the label, was a print of which he had hanging on his wall, worked for that. And so the brand was born. 10 years later, he sold it to Huneeus Vintners, who owned Quintessa in Napa, and were quite large owners of wineries. He sold it for $40 million, and I believe at that stage they were making something like 80,000 cases a year. So the brand had grown really rapidly. 6 years later, the brand was sold on to Constellation, the large winemaking group. And at that stage, I think they were making 165,000 cases a year. So I wouldn't be surprised to find that today there's more than 200,000 cases of this wine being made, possibly substantially more. Certainly, it's distributed worldwide, so it's grown from that 345 cases quite substantially. The blend, I don't have a definite indication of what the blend was in 2019, but the approach is to try and be about 50% Zinfandel, with probably 25% of Cabernet Sauvignon, and then the balance being made up of the Syrah, the Petite Syrah, and the Charbono. Another influence on the wine is oak. I would suspect, although again the technical detail I've not been able to find that. I should imagine some American oak. Possibly, who knows, some technical oak, so possibly rather than aging in barrel, some of the wine ferments with oak staves in the tank to give an oak flavour. I don't know, but that can work to provide integrated oak flavours at a reasonable price. I should also say, although the winery is in Oakville in the Napa Valley, I believe the fruit source for this comes from all over California, hence the California designation rather than a Napa designation. So let's have a look at the wine, shall we? Have a look at the colour first, see what they make of that. I would say that was a medium ruby, and it becomes paler to the rim. There's not a huge depth of this. There's a fairly dark pigmentation, but it's not deep, it's not inky or anything like that. There's a sort of an almost sort of raspberry coloured red to the rim there. So look at the aromas. The aromas are really quite, attractive, appealing, juicy. They're jammy. There's a real ripeness there, and there's a spectrum of red to black fruits through from sort of juicy raspberry through things like sort of Loganberry, mulberry, to of course high ripeness red cherry, and then through to a sort of ripe black cherry note. So there's that spectrum there, and that's overlaid with, hints of spice, almost like the sort of with the raspberry notes, almost like the pips of the raspberry in there. And then sort of right at the back there are some lifted notes of cedar as well. So I suspect all those spice notes is from the oak there. So that's for taste, shall we? First thing to say is that there is a noticeable sweetness there. I wouldn't say this was a sweet wine in terms of like a dessert wine. It's not lusciously sweet or anything like that, but there's enough sweetness there to stop the tannic structure from being drying and to stop the acidity from seeming too sharp. And that's a very deliberate approach, I think. So you've got an initial rush of fresh red fruit there. That's sort of, again, the same spectrum as on the nose, the sort of raspberry, maybe some plum, actually, some sort of fresh plum, but also that sort of mulberry through to red cherry notes. But there's quite a concentration as well, actually. All those sort of red fruits resolve into a sort of a dark fruit, almost a sweet black licorice core at one stage. The structure, there is some grip in there, but it's stopped from being astringent by the sweetness, which rounds it out. There's also, the wine is labelled as having 15.5% alcohol. Now, I certainly don't see that as being hot, or as sometimes too much alcohol can close up the finish, instead of which I'm getting quite a delicate red fruit and exotic spice on the finish. So, actually there's quite a bit of fruit there to balance that rich alcohol. But it's a relatively weighty wine. I wouldn't say that this was a wine you'd need to age. Its entire production style is to make it appealing as a young wine and to make it instantly drinkable. To stop the harshness of the acids and the tannins from meaning you need to leave it in the cellar for 5 or 6 years. This is the 2019. I believe the current release from the winery is 2021. So actually this has had a couple of years in bottle already. But I wouldn't worry about leaving it for 3 or 4 more years. I'm sure it would be absolutely fine. It seems to have the balance and the density to cope with that. And it would probably soften and round out really nicely. But it doesn't need it. This is instantly drinkable. As long as you don't find that sweetness objectionable. I think it would pair with, some easy, it could be drunk on its own, or it would pair with sort of nice, easy drinking foods, easy pairing foods perhaps I'm talking about there. So things like pizza, things like barbecues, those sort of, quite straightforward fruit flavours would actually act as a backdrop to show off the lovely spectrum of juicy fruit that this wine shows. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this interesting. Do please feel free to like and share the video, and do feel free to follow us on YouTube. But most importantly, I hope we'll see you again. Bye now.